Hello, everyone, and welcome to another 2017 Game of the Year discussion roundtable. We gotta think of a better name for that. I am Alex O'Neill. I am your moderator for this podcast, and today we are talking about The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, my personal favorite video game that came out in the year of our Lord 2017. Joining me this episode, I guess, is Alex Van Aken,
What's up? Hey.
Neil Rivera,
Hey, how's it going?
and Reb Valentine.
Good evening, friends.
So we've gathered around the fireside this evening to talk about The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, also known as the dopest. Just full stop, full period after that one. And I wanted to kind of start things off with a little bit of an icebreaker, and just figure out where everyone is at with Zelda in general, because I think it's reasonable to say that Breath of the Wild could very well be your first Zelda because it is so different than all the others before it. I don't think that's the case for any of us, but I've played all of the Zelda games, including Zelda 2, the other black sheep in the franchise, as I like to call it. And previous to this game, A Link to the Past and Majora's Mask were my two favorite games in the franchise, 2D and 3D respectively. So I was curious where everyone was at with that. Reb, what about you? Where were you at with Zelda before Breath of the Wild?
I had very recently played Link Between Worlds, which was weird because I hadn't played Link to the Past, and so a lot of the really awesome context was lost on me. I played Twilight Princess on the Wii U.
Okay.
And then other than that, I had very little Zelda experience, except when I was like 5 years old, we had a very, very old copy of the original Zelda in my after school program, and I watched eighth graders play it and beat it over and over again.
Were there? Okay, I was. It was in an after-school program. I didn't know if you were just like in a situation where eighth graders showed up and started playing Zelda in front of you.
No, no. I
Did
mean,
anyone ever finish it?
they had like the same save file, but they were all working on it once. And so between people like kind of arguing where they needed to go and doing the little up, down, left, right thing to get into the graveyard over and over because they thought it was cool to show off. I think they did eventually beat it.
Okay.
But I had the basic like idea of how it worked, and I guess it was at some point I played it, and it was probably my very first video game that I ever played. I mean, I was 5, I got like nowhere.
Yeah.
Neil, what about you? Where were you at with Zelda?
I have the Hylian crest tattooed on my chest.
Nice.
Though I'm nowhere near. I haven't played every Zelda game. My introduction to the series was with Ocarina of Time. I actually remember distinctly. I was in the 4th grade, and there was a kid who wouldn't stop talking to me about it. And I kind of told him, I was like, dude, this isn't up my alley. I don't want anything to do with it. Long story short, he had the last laugh because that's my favorite game in the series. I beat that. I've beaten it. I've bought and beaten every iteration of that game. Majora's Mask I've played and beaten. Other than that, I mean, I played a little bit of Twilight Princess. I haven't beaten a Zelda game since then until Breath of the Wild. But played Wind Waker, played Twilight Princess, just kind of played them in bits. Actually, I lied. I beat A Link Between Worlds as well, but similar to Rebecca, I didn't play A Link to the Past.
Alex, what about you? Round us out. Where is your heart with Zelda?
Yeah. So growing up, Zelda was like always the series that got away for me. Grew up, my Nintendo 64 was at my mom's house, who was a single parent, and we just didn't really have the money to buy games. So we had enough to buy an N64, and then we'd rent games every weekend or rent a game every weekend. And so, being like the save games were on the cartridges, I was always getting a random save file, and I was always determined to kind of start over. I think there was like one time where I booted up somebody else's save, and I was like, "What the heck is happening?" Because it was after the time like when Link's older,
Yeah.
and I'd never seen that before. I was like, "This game is huge." But needless to say, I never beat Ocarina of Time, even though I played it dozens and dozens of times. And just the nature of weekend rentals, my skill at that age, and just general like financial resources, I never beat it, and I never really played. I played some Twilight Princess. Um, Kind of fell off of it because the tutorial was just so long. Just that intro was pretty slow for me, and it kind of fell off. But then I came into Breath of the Wild, and this is the game. I was like, man, I want to play this, and I want to be a Zelda fan. Like I've always wanted to be one, but I just haven't been able to really sink my teeth into the games up until Breath of the Wild, and it is by far my favorite game of 2017.
Yeah. And
so that's kind of where I'm at going into this discussion.
And I like that too, because I feel like whether you've played video games your whole life or you've just kind of started getting into them, there's still some kind of familiarity with Zelda. Whether it's like I've never played it, but I've always understood it from a distance. Like, Zelda is an important franchise, and I think Breath of the Wild is important in its own right, although I don't necessarily think it is going to be as groundbreaking as we all kind of considered it would be, because the way Zelda Breath of the Wild approaches new things is so unique to itself and so insular in its own world that I don't know how well that could even translate to another video game franchise. But it's safe to say that, like, Zelda at least has had some kind of interaction with all of us, which is cool. I think it's also exciting that a lot of people are getting on Switch and starting their Zelda gaming experience with Breath of the Wild, which is very different. But I think because Breath of the Wild changes so many things, there's a reasonable cause for concern as well. But I you know, because generally these podcasts, I want to highlight some of the better things, or the things we kind of like the most of, you know, what you've played of Zelda before. What was the thing, or video games before, what was the thing in Breath of the Wild that was new and different that you had never seen before that you loved? We can start with you, Neil. I'm just curious, like, if it was a change to gameplay or a change to storytelling. Go on.
It was, I mean, the big thing that stood out to me was very much that it's a sandbox in the true sense. You know, sandbox is a term that I think we like to throw around a lot in the games industry. And to me, it's never really held that much true. I usually kind of, when I do play a game, especially an open world game, I tend to stick to the rules of whatever that world is. So even if I'm playing a GTA, I'll tend to play it a little bit more realistically. Whereas Zelda Breath of the Wild, especially coming from a franchise that was traditionally so rooted in story and linearity and dungeons, to just come out and say, all right, here you are. And it was a very much an open world sandbox where you could approach any situation a different, you know, given way, that puzzles didn't have one true solution. You could, you know, I remember looking up one of the crappy motion control shrines and being like, hey, you could totally get this ball on the back end of the little puzzle thing and just roll it into the hole you need to get it in that way. So just you know, seeing different solutions to puzzles in a Zelda game was just kind of unreal for me.
Yeah, and it's cool because, like, the majority of the puzzles take place in those shrines. Obviously, there are puzzles throughout the world as well, but they're such a different approach to what we see as Zelda puzzles, which is, like, pushing blocks or throwing bombs at walls or things that we had kind of been taught in that franchise. And I don't think there is any kind of traditional Zelda puzzle in this game at all. Like, not even one. And that's a huge, huge departure in something that is core to what Zelda is. What about you, Alex? What was, like, a change in this, like, from, I mean, you don't have as much Zelda experience, but, like, from video games for you that really worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily anything brand new to video games, but just its implementation of, like, a really strict physics system that, like, you can really get to know the limitations of and get to know the rule set that kind of makes up the world that you're playing within. And then being able to manipulate that play space based on your knowledge of the game. And I think a lot of my favorite parts were, you know, like, having, like, an updraft, and then, like, in the middle of combat, kind of putting on my glider and, like, kind of going up in the air, and then jumping down and, like, with my sword and fighting somebody. Like, there's just, like, so many little playful things that happen, or playful opportunities that, you know, come up because of the physics system and just, like, how consistent it is. But yeah, that was, like, probably my favorite part of the game, one of my favorite parts of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, I also like the idea that you can set a small patch of grass on fire and then you use the updraft from that to get some actual altitude.
Exactly.
Because, you know, that's how that works.
An obscene amount of altitude at that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Reb?
So I've been playing a little bit of Skyrim on PC lately, and it's kind of reminding me about something that's really important to me in Breath of the Wild, and that's, if you see something interesting, it usually is interesting. Not only is it usually interesting, but you can go there. Like, the game is designed to draw your eyes to things and get you there. And that's like, so, I mean, contrasting not just with Skyrim, but with any, which is, you know, brilliant in its own ways, but with any other open world game in the past, you know, I'd look around, I'd see things that might be important or might not be. And I could eventually get there by following the paths the game had laid out for me, or maybe I couldn't get there at all. Maybe it was just a nice set piece or what have you. But in Breath of the Wild, everything from, you know, the design of the land to, you know, where the mountains are placed, where the trees are placed, where the glowing shrine is placed so you can see it from the hilltop. Everything is just so incredibly deliberate. It's not just like this patchwork of textures and things that are meant to fill in space, even if it is just an awful lot of space that looks like it had to have been filled in. And so just the constant, like, the first like 40 hours of the game, I didn't even realize I was like playing for as long as I was. I would just see something and I would be drawn to it and I would run to it and I would be so excited to get there, even if it was just this little tiny thing. It was meant for me to have seen and discovered and found, and then there would automatically every time be something else that I could see and go to. It was just this constant barrage of delights. There was never any moment where I was looking around thinking, oh God, I have to go do this thing that I don't want to do, or where do I go next?
Yeah, and they're like, going off of that, Breath of the Wild is probably the most RPG-esque Zelda game that there has been, in that there are more traditional stats and weapons have damage numbers that they do, even if they're hidden. But I was playing another open-world RPG from this year. I don't want to necessarily use this as a forum to crap on some other game, but Assassin's Creed Origins is a much more traditional open-world RPG where you're kind of going from section to section. And there was a point where I was like, I kind of want to like break away and go up to this top left corner of the map and just see what's going on there. And you get there, and it's like all the enemies are level 35 or higher, and I'm level 20, and I can't actually stay there because I'll just get one-shot by anything. And there's never anything like that in Zelda. I think there's never anything like that in Skyrim as well, because of the way scaling works in that game. But Zelda, even if it does get harder, there isn't necessarily a section, even like the end game, Hyrule Castle, where it is impossible to continue. It's just very difficult to an extent. And I like that the world is kind of like, there is a discrete leveling system going on in the background with the enemies, but it's all kind of leveling with you, and it's all maintaining some level of challenge. Kind of the further out you go from the plateau, it does get harder, but it never gets overwhelming.
It's constantly inviting you and welcoming you forward.
So like things like you know, the divine beast in the sky that you can see from the plateau, and you're like, what the heck is that? You can go there and you can get there. And I'm like, I recently started a second playthrough of Breath of the Wild, and I went off in that direction instead of kind of going to the bottom right of the map, and started kind of filling in everything in that direction. And it's been a very different experience, and it's been a very different level of challenge because of that. And I think that's really cool. It is inviting in a way that few games, even this year with so many open world games, are, and that's really cool. A big thing in Breath of the Wild is how you play it, and I think like we've all kind of started dipping our toes into how we played it. Apparently, you know, some people are just setting bushes on fire and using them to get some altitude for some sky drops. But
I think that's most of us.
Yeah, true. I was not as fun. I was more of a sneaky person, but I really like, and how you were saying, Reb, like going, like seeing something and going to do it. I was kind of like that, but with the map. Like I would go to a tower, I would unfill the map, and I would look at all the names of the places, which were tons of awesome, like sometimes obscure references to the other Zelda games. And I'd be like, all right, I'm going to go here, here, and here, and then I'm going to just kind of sweep around this whole section of the map before I go on to the next one. So I very like meticulously moved up Hyrule and explored every single inch of it.
And that's
through the game.
And that's what I think it does so much better than, I mean, not to continue to crap on Assassin's Creed Origins, but I mean, like Ubisoft games in general, it's instead of, you know, hey, here's everything you can do right here served to you on a silver platter, whereas Zelda, it made you work for it, and then it rewarded you for actually going out and finding it.
Yeah, and there was reason to be concerned with seeing towers in this game, because that is such a, like, the cornerstone of Ubisoft's formula is towers and expanding your map and kind of expanding what you can see with that, all the points of interest in there. And Zelda like goes halfway on it in a very smart and very like controlled direction. So it's impressive to see the restraint there because it puts a little bit more trust in the player to just, hey, like this world is worth exploring, but I'm going to let you do it at your own pace. And that makes a big difference. So off of that, what was like one story, and we might revisit this. I'm sure there were plenty of stories, but what was one story that at the time, at the very least, felt super unique to you? It was maybe the first story or later on in the game that really stood out to you. Alex, we can start with you. I'm just curious if there was any like one moment that was like, oh snap, this is it.
Yeah. So I think just the most, and I've shared the story on a podcast, back when it first came out, but just like right off the bat, like jumping off the Great Plateau, I landed in I kind of went south as well, like down the southern right, south east of the map, and landed in like this giant like field of grass, just chilling. I'm like, man, this is so beautiful. And then like a pack of bokoblins on horseback come, and they see me, and like this whole fight breaks out, and I'm just off the plateau, so my weapons are kind of limited in what I've collected so far, and just like having a limited amount of arrows at the time, like, all right, I have to hit like every one of these shots. And after doing it, I killed the chieftain. I take his horse, which is like this crazy blue spotted colored horse, super cool. And then I kind of ride off towards the first tower that I see. And on the way there, and this is the first time that weather, I guess dynamic weather rather, was kind of introduced. And this you start to get the thunder roll and it starts raining. I'm like, oh cool, like this is super moody. I'm digging it. And then I go up to, it was the lake tower, I think. So that's the tower that's like surrounded by almost like a fortress of bokoblin and wizards and such. And I'm like, okay, well, clearly there's probably 20 enemies at this little stronghold. I'm not going to fight them like head on. So that's the first moment I kind of like started to stealth, and I stealth past all the enemies. Again, it's night, it's super moody, and then I get to the tower. I'm like, I finally made it. Here we go. And it's raining, and I start climbing. I'm like, wait, what? And I just keep sliding down. And then I think I figured out it took me probably 20 minutes, but I was like, okay, if I move up and I count to 5 and then jump, I'll slide a little bit, but I make more progress than I lose. And so it was this game of getting to the next platform while it was raining. And then I finally make it to the top, everything's Gucci. Then the lightning rolls in, and I see myself, sparks are coming off. Again, all this is the first time seeing this, and so it's just really special. And then I'm like, dang it, I need to find another horse, because I just assumed this giant open world, my horse phased out of the game. And then I look down, and I see the horse, and I'm freaking out, oh my gosh, the horse didn't leave me. And so then I hang glide down off the mountain in the middle of the thunder, just butt naked because it's thundering and it's lightning, and I don't want to get shot. And my horse gets scared by the storm and starts running away from me. And so it was this game of I felt like I was in Mission Impossible, hang gliding onto the top of the car, but instead of the car, it was the horse. And so I just fly off the tower, land on my horse as he's running away, and just keep going. And I was like, I am a badass. And that was my first big moment of the game.
That's awesome.
That
series, good. But yeah.
I know a lot of people that jumped off the Great Plateau and hang glided directly onto a horse.
That's awesome.
That kind of stuff is that's crazy. I can't imagine that being the first interaction you have off the plateau.
Yeah.
Reb, what about you? Do you have anything that sticks out to you?
So I started out following the story path sort of closely. I got out to Hateno Village and, kind of did all the quests out there. And while I was out there, there are some quests that sort of draw your eye over toward the big snowy peak that's over there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a lot of hot pepper food, and I didn't really want to go look for some more. I kind of wanted to go see what else was going on. There were towers, there were shrines, there were things I wanted to do. But I thought, well, I've got a little bit. I've got this warm doublet. I'll go up there, get as far as I can, and just sort of, see what's up there. And if I need to come back later, then I can. Yeah. So I went over there, and I had, eaten my hot food, and I had I didn't have a lot of time. I think I had 3 dishes. I had maybe 6-8 minutes to be over there at that point in the game. And I got up there, and there's, all these fairly strong enemies up there. I mean, the game does sort of scale to you, but at the time, for my armor and for my gear, it was just it was pretty scary. So I'm like trying to sneak around all these guys. I'm like climbing through the snow. I'm trying to get all around them. And I actually get to the top of the mountain. And that's where Nadra is, the blue dragon. And at this point, I've not seen any of the other dragons. I've only seen this one. And I think she's the one you're supposed to see first. Like if you're, well, supposed to. But she's like, you know, curled up on the mountain and she's covered with that Ganon corruption. And this is also the first time I've seen that Ganon corruption stuff because I haven't gone near Hyrule Castle yet. And I'm just looking at Nadra up there and covered in this shadowy stuff. And there's like, no, I don't know what to do. Like, is she evil? If I hit her with an arrow, is she going to kill me? Like, I think I sat there like with my bow and arrow, like debating what to do. It looked like it was something I was supposed to shoot, but I just didn't know for like several minutes. And I'm like freaking out, asking my husband, what do I do? Am I going to get like one shot by this dragon if I do something? And he finally convinced me to take the shot. And I did. And it's this gorgeous secret sequence because Nadra flies off and you have to follow her and try to shoot the corruption off of her in order to free her. And like she's creating all these updrafts as she flies, so you can pretty much just glide indefinitely. And she's going in this huge circle around this whole section of Hyrule. And so I'm getting like this gorgeous, quick tour of Hyrule at night. The stars are out above me. The forests are down below. There's all these updrafts to keep me in the air. I'm helping this enormous, beautiful blue dragon. And I'm just sitting there wide-eyed, like, I don't have very many arrows. I don't have enough cold resistance, but I gotta save this dragon. And I did it, and I landed, and I got access to the Shrine of Wisdom that's back there. I think it's Wisdom. And I was just, like, elated. Like, my heart was pounding when I finally finished it. And it was just, like, this beautiful moment. And I, like, took a million screenshots and was, like, tearing up. And I was so happy that I had taken the risk to come up this mountain and find this dragon. And it was just the most rewarding thing at the end, just to see her fly off.
That was my story, so now I'm very upset.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Like that, there were a couple. Yeah, it is really. It's a standout too because you're right. I think Nadra is kind of like the dragon that you're supposed to see. But because I had kind of gone through the southeast portion of the map a little bit, kind of like where it gets a little jungly, I went over Lake Hylia and you see the other dragon. I forget it's. Ferora something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Farush, yes. And I saw it like very, very far in the distance, and I was like, what the hell is this?
Yep.
And I was kind of terrified because, you know, like you said, like you see this giant snake-like dragon. It's like, is this a monster that I can fight? But the nature sequence is so cool because it is so like calculatedly set up to be stumbled into because you hear someone in Hateno that's just like, yeah, you know, like the Shrine of Wisdom's up there, but it's been weird ever since, you know, 100 years ago. And I've heard stories about it, but they never mention a dragon ever. No one ever mentions the dragons until much later in the game. And you go up there and you just see this giant, beautiful dragon. And it was my first, like, well, this is like Shadow of the Colossus tier, like scale in a world that is also this big and this full of things.
Even now, like, I'm well over 100 hours of play in this game. Like, but even now, whenever I hear that dragon music or start seeing random updrafts, I have to stop whatever I'm doing and look around and be like, okay, who is it? Who's coming? Hi.
Yeah.
Like, I have to stop and just watch them fly by. It's just this gorgeous,
Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah, I still feel a little bit bad trying to shoot their teeth out of their mouth, but but you know, I got to get my armor up. What about you, Neil?
It's funny because I mean, in terms of how I think about Breath of the Wild, it's like, yeah, the big grand moments are there for me, but there's a couple stories that really kind of stick out to me just from my time on the plateau, and the first one being the first time I got killed by a guardian. Because it's just like, what the hell is this thing? You know, the music starts playing. You know, obviously, in terms of the soundtrack, the music is probably the more like it's one of the more active tracks in the soundtrack. So I mean, you're instantly just like, okay, what's going on? Something bad's about to happen, and of course, he blows you up. And then obviously, figuring out that you can deflect the beams with the shield later on in the game. And I mean, I didn't figure this out until I probably had to have been like 60, 70 hours in. Like, oh shit, I can actually deflect these. And so I actually made it a point to go back to the Great Plateau and take out the original Guardian. And it was a good moment of it's like a cathartic moment. It's just like, okay, I started this game and didn't have any idea what I was doing, and then kind of went out and explored and kind of took my lumps in combat, and then came back, all the stronger and all the wiser, and really just kind of put it to the test. Obviously against that one Guardian, then obviously against Ganon at the end of the game. But then the other one, the other short story was the when you're going around doing the tutorial shrines. There's a sequence next to the, or not really a sequence, but it's an area next to the little cabin where you first learn how to cook and you get the warm doublet, where it's like, well, how do I get across this big chasm? And I mean, it's a testament, obviously, to how meticulous everything in the game is. But, I'm sitting here like, all right, well, I could chop down this tree and use it as a bridge. And I mean, like, in retrospect, like it's such a, looking back in Zelda, you can do something like that. Like, yeah, of course you can do that. Like, it's no big deal. But having played that game, especially so early on in that game, playing it was just like, oh my God, like literally anything is possible. Like I can chop down a tree, I can climb, I can jump, and coming from Zelda, which was very strict in what you could and couldn't do, it was just kind of an eye-opening experience.
Yeah. It's that game is very good about kind of breaking down everything you understand about its rule set to be and then rebuilding it for Breath of the Wild specifically on the Great Plateau. Another good story for me, outside of the nature sequence, was, the kind of story leads you to the Zora domain first, because it's that and the Rito village. The Rito villages are kind of the easier areas to start off with as far as like going for one of the divine beasts. And in the Zora's domain, there's a sequence where you need to get bolt arrows. And you climb to the top of a mountain and you find your first Lionel, which are, for all intents and purposes, the strongest enemies in the game, outside of the Guardians, which kind of become beneath you once you get the Master Sword. But that first fight I had with a Lionel is and probably will be one of the most intense gaming experiences I had in 2017, because I was pretty underleveled. As far as like having hearts and stamina, and equipment especially. I knew I blew through every weapon except for one to kill it, and it was just a series of time dodges and like flame roaring up. Like I was pulling up my screenshots to see like any other moment that might have stuck out to me, and like on that mountaintop it was raining.
Oh no.
Don't stop recording.
Yeah. Don't stop.
Are we all still here?
recording. I am.
I think we lost Alex.
Oh no.
No, mid-story too.
Oh.
That'll be fun to edit.
Did we lose both Alexes or just one Alex?
I'm here.
Yeah.
What? Wait.
Alex Van Aken is here.
Oh, is it just me and... Oh, he is.
No, yeah, Van Aken is here.
Oh, his webcam disappeared for a bit. I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Sideways
Yeah,
man's back.
Yes. I was texting him.
Hey, it wouldn't be a podcast recording without a little bit of technical difficulties.
I feel like the audio is cutting in and
That's
out
how
for
it
everybody
goes.
from me right now.
Google Hangouts doesn't like us.
So.
Maybe.
Yeah, the last one I did, my Ethernet cable just like popped out mid recording. I was like, "Oh, are you kidding me?"
That's the worst.
Yeah.
Okay, he's aware.
Will this stay up?
It can't keep up with the hype.
Google Hangouts, man.
I think it's just my internet outside of Google Hangouts, but where did I cut off? So at some point, in the
You're talking about the Lionel, and it was a combination of the time dodges.
You were looking at your screenshots.
Right.
Yeah.
It was raining. Was the last thing you said?
It was raining. There was fire between me and the Lionel. It was very intense. I beat it. I had like 20 extra hearts from yellow hearts because I was not prepared enough for it. And I came out on top, but like even doing that at a lower level was very, very rewarding. And I think there's a lot of stuff that is like self-rewarding within Breath of the Wild. But kind of going off of some of our favorite moments that we had in the game, what was your favorite area in the game of all of Hyrule? Because, you know, what I like about this Hyrule is it incorporates a lot of, you know, for me, a lot of the different versions of Hyrule we've seen before, like even some things that you only see in the very brief ending moments of Wind Waker, as far as Hyrule is concerned, to things that you see in Twilight Princess and in Ocarina of Time. It kind of takes that and then adds on to it as well, with the whole Rito section and like the snowy tundra mountains to the northwest. It creates this very, very new Hyrule that is both familiar and very, very different at the same time.
Yeah.
Reb, what was your favorite part of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule?
Well, I feel sort of silly because earlier you asked about what other Zelda games we had played, and I somehow completely left out the fact that I played and beat Wind Waker on the GameCube, which was the first console I ever owned. And so I loved Wind Waker, and I did the Rito Village last. Okay. And so showing up there, I had seen the Rito around, like, you know, in a few places they kind of show up around Hyrule. And so I knew they were in the game, but I don't know. I didn't expect the music to hit me the way it did. Yeah. Like, it's so slow when you're like kind of walking in. It's just kind of that really slow intro. And then it goes into that rendition of the Rito theme from Wind Waker. And then it's just this gorgeous treehouse with this huge bird overlooking these snowy mountains. And there's like, you know, kind of these ancient ruins dotted around. And then if you look in the other direction, there's all this weird terrain, like with thunderstorms. And that whole area was so varied. And I don't know, there was just something about it that like hit me right in the nostalgia while also making me look around and wonder and think, wow, I have already put in, you know, so many hours into this game. And there is still just this whole area. There's like this huge area of snow, like wilderness in the corner of the map that I have no real particular reason to go to, but I could go in there and I bet there's a whole bunch of hidden crap in there. There's like hidden doors I can throw snowballs at to unlock. Like, it was like the secondary realization when I got there that everything is just so incredibly huge. And that combined with kind of like that little push of nostalgia from the music and the characters, it just hit me the right way. And that was Von Meadow, I think, is that Divine Beast. That was also my favorite Divine Beast of the four. So that whole area.
Neil, the best part of Hyrule, definitively.
Full stop, the Gerudo Valley.
Okay.
And this comes for me kind of similar to Reb. My favorite area in Ocarina of Time is the Gerudo Desert. And so even though it didn't quite hit the same nostalgia peaks that the Rito Village did, it was special to me out, you know, specific to Wind Waker in that was the first area that I went to. And it was the first time I kind of felt the scale of the game, where it was, oh wow, like I'm going on an adventure, you know, like once you fly off the Great Plateau, I just kind of messed around and got, you know, was kind of familiarizing myself more with the mechanics. But this was very much like, oh, I'm wandering. I ran into one of I forgot what the name of the Cyclops creatures are. It's blanking, but the Hinox. Yeah, I ran into the Hinox who's on that plateau in between the two bridges. You know, and it just kind of you know, it was the first time I brought up the map and I was like, okay, this is the route I'm going to take, and I'm plotting it out. And then once you get there, I mean, as far as like the story is concerned, I mean, the story beats I thought were some of the best. The part where you have to dress as a woman to get into Gerudo Town was fantastic, and was also very, you know, like kind of reintroduced the lore. And just some of the stuff, just kind of exploring around the desert after I was done with the story, like fighting the Moldugas. It was very similar to the like your fight with the Lionel. My first fight with the Lionel was like, oh my god, how do I beat this thing? And even though he gets a little bit easier once you figure it out, it was that the first encounter was really intimidating, and it felt like a true boss fight.
Alex, I'm very curious for yours. Does it have water?
Yeah, I think my favorite part of just the map of Hyrule and Breath of the Wild this time around is the Dueling Peaks area. You'll run into travelers, and they kind of give you a riddle. There's a treasure chest somewhere, and just like I think it's at the first one of the first horse stables you run to that give you that. And I just remember like running around, climbing everything, just looking for some treasure. And then I find there's 2 peaks at the top of the Dueling Peaks, and they're incredible, like just the views that you get in the vistas. And also, I really just enjoy like Hateno Village is one of my favorite places. It's got a great one of the best tracks in the soundtrack. Has to do with Hateno, and just like the vibes that I got from that, just very like peaceful. And then kind of going up past Hateno, you eventually spot Eventide Island out in the distance, and like just making your way there and just exploring everything that is. I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen that part of the game yet, but just like that whole arc. I think also like Akala and like up north, bears, and like the trees are really pretty, like different reds and oranges, and then going up to the edge of the world and seeing the labyrinth across the ocean, across the Akala Sea, like those are just like really special moments for me.
So like just the entire east half of the map is what you're saying.
Pretty much. Like I look at I have the map pulled up just so I can remember names.
Yeah. And
I think the entire right half of the map kind of resonated with me the most. And Gerudo and up northwest, not really as much for me personally. Just again, I don't really have that nostalgia that a lot of people do have. And so I just really appreciated all the vistas and just like a lot of my first moments, like finding like a Hynex, finding a Lionel, so on and so forth, were on that portion of the map on the right side. So a lot of those, man, I love that side of the map. So.
Yeah, for me, the Akala Highlands, that was easily my favorite part of the map for a number of reasons. It's okay. I mean, clearly all of you forgot about Terrytown, which is the best. It's the best part of the game. Just not the best part of the game, but it's very good. That is some of the best music in the game for me. And yeah, the Akala Highlands mostly like weirdly it reminds me of the Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons. Because there is, that's a big game focused on seasons. It's the only Zelda game that I think has any kind of fall colors in it.
Yeah.
And the Akala Highlands is entirely fall colors, a lot of oranges and reds, like you said. I think it just looks incredible, and it is this weirdly, it's this weirdly fall, autumn, like northern part of the land that is not, it's not snowy like you would expect a northern part of the area to be, but it has kind of like that late year vibe to it. It just looks beautiful. Terrytown is there. It's the first time you meet the weird like monster seller guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just has like a lot of great moments for me. And like going off to the labyrinth and whatnot, and the northern Akala research lab as well. Where you get to hear like the best like weird guitar slam in that game. So yeah, like the Akala Highlands are just like they're super special to me. But I do want to highlight one other thing that I doubt like anyone would necessarily say is their favorite place in the game, but it's Laurelin Village. Because Laurelin Village serves no purpose in the overall story.
No, it doesn't.
But it's just there, It is exactly what you would expect a small fishing village to be. It's got 4 houses in it, a bunch of fishermen in it. It has maybe like 10 total people that live there, and it's this beautiful like little section of that beach life that everyone's trying to live. And its existence is a reward in of itself. Like finding your way there and seeing like this totally unique culture that exists in this very, very small village off in the corner that gets its own village, gets its own spot on the map. For no like reason for the overall story of Breath of the Wild, like you never have to visit there for any purpose in exploring the world or exploring the game. It is just this off little town that has its own quiet little people and its own quiet little settlement, and I just love that so much.
It's great too because there's characters that you meet that will tell you about it and will tell you what's there, but they never like prompt you to go there for any meaningful reason. They just say, "Hey, if you want to go there, it's there." And so, like, I wandered around that area of the map doing questy things, I guess, for a while, but I never. And I kept hearing about it. I kept thinking, I wonder when someone will tell me I have to go there, and no one ever did. And so finally, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go check it out.
I just like it is so much of this game is like the fact that this little village exists for no purpose but to find it and just see how gorgeous it looks and see the characters in it, and like that is so the core of Breath of the Wild. In like every time you find a place is kind of a reward in itself.
Yeah, I mean they do that through like the encounters with the the other travelers too. I mean, kind of we've been obviously talking about it is it really just builds this big giant community. I mean, it makes the world feel alive that okay, these guys know about this treasure and okay, well, can you find it? And it may not always lead to something super rewarding in terms of materialistic value in the game, but it almost always points to something in the game, and just really kind of makes that world feel big and alive.
Yeah, like the woman you find in the woods at some point who tells you about how she lost her best friend, and her best friend was a horse, and that was her traveling companion, and she tells you about this god that can bring horses back to life. And it's, again, a part of the game that you never have to interact with. If you ever kill your horse, you can bring your horse back to life. If you haven't committed too many horse crimes. But the way it is phrased through the delivery mechanism of the game of this woman who lost someone she refers to as her friend, her traveling companion, and then you find out it's her horse, and if you tell her like, no, I don't care. She's like, wouldn't you want to believe that you can bring your best friend back? And I'm like, God, yeah, I do want to believe that. Like, I feel so guilty. So she's like, this woman is off on her own adventure, exploring this whole world, looking for this horse god, who ends up being like this weird skull creature in a great fairy fountain. But there's so many little things like that out there that are just so exciting. The big thing that I think more people are divisive about is storytelling in Breath of the Wild, and I think there are a lot of different ways to approach it. I personally really like it, and we can kind of dive into why I like it in a little bit, but I'm curious how all of you felt about the overall story in Breath of the Wild, but more so the mechanism by which it's delivered, which for the most part are these memories, these 12 memories scattered throughout Hyrule that you actually have to go and find. Which, it's leading into the exploration part of the game. But it is a very different way to tell a Zelda story, especially coming off the back of Skyward Sword, which I know some of you, it sounds like, haven't played. Most of you haven't. But it is a very, like, by-the-numbers JRPG style story where, like, it's very slow, it's very methodical, it's very much driven by its narrative. This is not that. So, Alex, we can start with you. How did you feel about the story overall and how it was delivered?
Yeah, I mean, the story overall, like, it's nothing special. It's I mean, if we're talking objectives, just organic, but we're talking just memories. Like, I enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't anything spectacular, like, but it did provide me context for what I was doing. I think at the end of the game, when I finally see Zelda, and I got that kind of end part, I guess. And just like having the memories and all that, like it just kind of adds context. That makes things like, it makes you feel like, okay, like I have a relationship with this character. And yeah, again, nothing crazy special, but I think what I really love is how it's told through the memories themselves. A lot of times in open world games, the open world itself is either segmented or like hindered by the linear story it's trying to tell. And so, sometimes you'll find a place and it doesn't really make sense yet in the story or what you're doing. Or sometimes like in like a Far Cry game, like you the open world is kind of a segment of a larger open world. And then like you'll eventually progress and unlock that kind of stuff. But I like that I can go anywhere at any time and I don't have to worry about missing a part of the story, or did I talk to that guy? It's just me. It's my story, and then there are moments like my memories, like they don't get in the way. They provide context, and I really like it for that. And kind of it enhances the sandbox nature of Breath of the Wild's open world. So
Yeah. Reb, what about you?
I liked the subtlety of it. It wasn't in your face. It wasn't through a bajillion text boxes. It didn't. There were elements of it that I could get even just visually, just finding little tiny visual things in the world. Like one of my absolute favorite little storytelling moments is in Hyrule Castle. If you manage to get all the way into Zelda's study, there's the Silent Princess flower, the single one that's growing in her study, and I wasn't gonna pick it. Like, who's gonna pick that? But I mean, maybe you do. But just very subtle things like that. The one thing I wasn't as big a fan of was, on one hand, I understand why the memories are gained at your own pace effectively. Like you're kind of meant to discover them as you travel, because you run into the painter who kind of points you in the direction of one, and then you find it as you go. But they end up being sort of disjointed and out of order depending on how you explore the world. And while there's a certain consistency to that in the way that Link is kind of rediscovering himself and figuring himself out, it also just made things weird for me, because I think I only got about a third of them during my playthrough, because some of them were just in weird spots. And I ended up doing everything else in the game, but I wanted all the memories before Hyrule Castle. And so I ended up having to like scour the world. And so I just got this huge backlog of story like right at the end of the game. And I your mileage may vary on that depending on how you played and how, thorough you were, because I was reviewing the game on a timeline and I didn't quite have that time, and maybe some other people play it in more linear fashion. But I mean, that was the part that just kind of bothered me, was that there wasn't as slow a trickle of story as I would have liked, but I guess that was my own fault. The one thing that I really liked that I don't think gets praised enough is all the little tiny responses that Link can give to characters as he goes that shape his personality. The memories are largely a story about Zelda, which is wonderful, and that's what I'm interested in mostly. But Link in almost all these conversations is very much a blank slate, and I don't get as much of who he is aside from this kind of very quiet, stern, dedicated swordsman. Like, he's really boring if you just see him like that. But if you read all of his possible responses to things that people say, and his weird little physical quirks, and just again, those little subtleties, like you get this picture of this, quite a quiet, dedicated guy who is like really funny and intelligent and kind of weird, but people like him most of the time. And I don't know. I loved the subtleties, but the pacing was weird.
Yeah. And you, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that it was a little watered down just because of the open-ended nature of it. But I think in keeping with how Breath of the Wild breaks the traditional mold of a Zelda game and a traditional Zelda story, I really liked how it went about telling a story in which you had already lost. So you starting kind of in media res, like almost midway through, like you've already lost and Ganon has won. And so now like the real conflict begins. And then the memories, obviously, as you get them, kind of further emphasize that point. As far as, I remember the one with the, just the part where he's being overwhelmed by guardians, like that, I think to me was the most effective and the most powerful one, just because I hadn't played a Zelda game like that, where, I mean, it's very much traditionally a hero's journey where, you start, you build yourself up, there's some bumps along the way, but then it ultimately ends in the defeat. So knowing that, that you've already kind of been defeated, and that you're essentially enlisting the help of 4 people that are already dead, or for lack of a better term, just not there, really just kind of emphasizes the fact that it's a different story, a different kind of story.
Yeah. And going off of kind of what you were saying, Reb, about learning more about Link himself, like there is a phenomenally well hidden journal in Zelda's bedroom that you can find of her diary, and she talks about getting to know Link, and she talks about how after you get to know him a bit more, it's almost like you can't get him to stop talking, She references how he is, he's often very quiet, but once he opens up, you find someone who's kind of like unsure of themselves, and someone who is so steadfast because he feels he needs to be. And you get this weird context for Link that you've never had before. And the best part about that, and I think the best part about this story, is that you're not getting that context from your character. You are getting that context from someone who views and really respects your character. You're seeing Link through the lens of Zelda's eyes. And that relationship is so fascinating, especially in this game, because of how intimate it is. And like the memories are pictures that Zelda took, but they were pictures that Zelda took when Link was there, so that's how they kind of reawaken Link's memories. So a lot of their story is just so interconnected. I really it really worked for me how dispersed out the memories were, and it really worked for me because I guess I was finding them as I went along. So the pace hit along with me. I only had kind of 3 at the end before I went for the final fight. So I went and got those all together and finished the game. So I really liked the storytelling because it leans into the open world design in a way that, like, I think about other open world stories that are essentially point A to point B to point C, and so on and so forth, and this is almost beyond the opposite of that, and I really like that. It is very, very much trying to break the mold. I also really liked the 4 champions. Those characters really fun. Mm-hmm. The Rito one is Rivali is my favorite, and I know everyone hates him. And
no,
I love him.
I wish they honestly gave him. I felt like compared to the other 3, like he kind of just got pushed away, and maybe it's because of the fact that I think I did the Rito village. I think I did them 3rd, but it felt like compared to Urbosa and Daruk and Mifa, that like I look back and remember them a whole lot more than not that I disliked or liked him. It was just I don't really remember any big moments with him.
I think it's because he didn't have a character he was particularly attached to in the village, right? Mm-hmm. Dorito don't live as long as many of the other characters, and Urbosa was like very specifically very at the center of that village, where I think Rivali was not. So I think that's a big part of that, and that's why I think they start you with Mifa, or they kind of lean you into her story first.
Something that might be worth exploring to that effect. I know some or all of you haven't finished Champion's Ballad yet, but in Champion's Ballad, there is a point where you are able to basically you fight a boss, and then you're able to revisit and fight those bosses again as many times as you want. And every time you go back and it's optional, you don't have to do it, but any time that you want to go back and refight those bosses, you get a little bit more dialogue with the champions they're associated with. And some of that dialogue is very revealing, and Rivali's especially is good. And there's also each of the 4 champions gets a journal you can go back and read in their respective villages that has a little bit more about them. And I actually thought they did Rivali a little. I think they must have known that he didn't quite have as much, and so I think he got done some justice in the DLC. So if you don't want to fight them like a million times, you just go watch it on YouTube to get all the dialogue. But
that's exciting. I just kind of love that he's a little bit of an asshole.
Yeah.
Like he's just trying to have a good time. He's like, I'm pretty great. You all know that. So yeah, he's just very great. But I think like going off of that, and the kind of final point we'll have here is another more divisive part of this game is the quote unquote dungeons. And that's the 4, they translate, I guess, as closely as they can to the 4 divine beasts that are scattered throughout the land that make up kind of like the 4 major story points. How did you guys feel about all of these? Neil, we can start with you, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'd say in regards to the 4 divine beasts, I was a little let down, a little underwhelmed, just because I kind of have those preconceived notions about, okay, well, this is a dungeon in Zelda, so it should be like this, and it definitely broke from that tradition. Really, I mean, I guess the divine beasts themselves weren't that bad so much as it was the boss fights. The boss fights were a little underwhelming. I guess I should be more specific. But to me, I mean, the star of Breath of the Wild is the shrines. Not only finding them, but the act of actually doing the puzzles within the shrines. Just because it is so focused on the exploration aspect of it. I mean, there's some bad shrines, like the motion controls one I did not like, but I think I'm a little bit more willing to overlook the underwhelming nature of the four main temples, just because there's so much more in the world compared to previous Zelda games.
Yeah. Alex, what about you?
I actually really, really enjoyed the Divine Beasts. Each of them being like a massive puzzle was super fun, and just how they incorporate, like, just some of the, for example, like when you're in the Rito, Divine Beast. I can't remember the names of any of them really, but jumping, like unlocking like an air chamber and jumping out and parachuting to the other side, like. And I know, like, not everybody, maybe people didn't have that specific like experience, but like just. There's little moments of how I solve the puzzles, or not even solving puzzles, just getting to explore it. Whether like I died right after or whatever, like just I really enjoy the freedom that, and just like the puzzles themselves, like the challenges within the beasts themselves. Like Neil said, like the boss fights weren't that great, with the exception of, I think, the one in Gerudo I didn't really realize, and I enjoyed that one, and I also didn't prepare well, and so it was a lot more challenging. But the others just seemed kind of like an exercise, and I don't know, just repetition. Like it was just like, okay, I know what's happening. Like, let's do this. But I think the beasts themselves and the puzzles within them were really fun.
Yeah.
Reb, round us out.
I liked the four divine beasts for their own merits. I loved the way all the pieces interlocked together and made this one cohesive thing that felt like a giant machine for its own purposes, instead of just you walk into like a temple in Twilight Princess and it's like, why would anyone have ever built this? Yeah. Like, what is this stupid place?
Yeah.
I think the one thing that disappointed me about the dungeons overall was I never felt that there was there was never a final dungeon. I know it was supposed to be Hyrule Castle, but I felt that Hyrule Castle offered some avenues to get in that were just too easy. The first two attempts that I made to get into Hyrule Castle, I think one of them I did the waterfalls going up the back, and then another one I did something else to get in very easily. I don't remember what it was, but I never felt that there was just a big grand finale of a dungeon. And I think if I had, like, it would have made the four divine beasts feel better, because I wasn't disappointed in the moment when I was playing them, but by the time I beat the game, I looked back on them and I thought, wow, there wasn't really, like, you need that feeling, right? That feeling that you're, going up to this, big scary thing, and that all the things that you've learned are coming together. And I think Hyrule Castle was supposed to capture that, but it didn't for me. And now it has me looking back on the divine beasts thinking, well, none of those were like really overwhelmingly great either. I did like a salamander dungeon up on the volcano, because the first moment when you walk in and it's pitch black and you've got the blue flames, you're immediately like, whoa, what's going on here? Yeah. This is really cool. And you light things up really quickly. So that one, turns out to not be as scary.
It's in the mouth of a volcano. It's pretty
It's cool. In the mouth of a volcano!
Yeah, I really liked all the dungeons. I think there is definitely an understandable feeling that they're very easy. Like, some of them are easier than others, but I don't think they needed to be hard, right? Like, I've never... The thing about me is I've never thought of any single Zelda dungeon as difficult in the lineage of a Zelda dungeon. Like, if you've played Ocarina of Time Master Quest, like, yes, okay, we're talking about a weird, obscure, I have to hold my shield to duck under these spikes puzzles. But the difficulty wasn't an issue. What I loved the most was that they were places in the world. Like, you were saying about the elephant dungeon, that you can kind of like glide from one end to the other. I loved that you could just walk out the dungeon and then walk back in, and you were like, it was continuous. There was no loading screen, and it's true of everything in the world. But the idea that you're sitting on the edge of the lake, looking at this giant elephant creature that you can climb up, walk in it, and you're just in it, is still like mind-boggling to me, even though that's true of literally everything in the game. And like that's true of Hyrule Castle as well. And that still kind of blows my mind, because it is taking the concept of a dungeon and making it a part of the world. And that's what Breath of the Wild really does. Because you think about the shrines, you go down, loading screen, you're in the shrine. This isn't like that. This is like, it is a very much a piece of this world. And Hyrule Castle was that for me. It was like that big grand finale for me. The music, I like spent, it was literally at the end of 105 hours. It was the last thing I did. Sure, I was very over-prepared for it, but like, it was, the music's playing. It's got like a little bit of the original overworld theme, a little bit of the Dark World theme from A Link to the Past. I'm losing my goddamn mind. And, you know, I spent like 2 hours just going up and down all the different depths of Hyrule Castle as well. So that did kind of bring things together for me. But I think like if you take each dungeon in its aspect of the world, like being in the mouth of a volcano, being at the center of a lake in this giant elephant, and literally being in the sky, they are really incredible, immaculate, like intricate things that exist in this world. And I like that all of them use the kind of same idea of a puzzle, that, you know, it's based on motion and kind of angling and where you're at within that creature. It makes them feel more alive to me. So they very much worked for me. Although I understand,
Alex, play Champion's Ballad.
Yeah,
I should probably do that.
I didn't mention. I guess none of us mentioned also the set pieces leading up to the each Divine Beast, where I particularly enjoyed them.
And shout out to Teba.
Yeah, I mean, just like having to, like, I remember, I think it was the elephant one where you had to, you know, shoot the arrows
the
at
back
the legs.
Of my Sweet Prince.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't a whole lot of like, man, this was an awesome set piece moments, but like there were a few of them, and they were really good, and most of them were leading up to Divine Beast. So I felt like there was a good trajectory to getting them there.
Yeah, agree.
I also loved the subtle symmetry of the 4 dungeons, each not requiring or only focusing on, but kind of generally guiding you towards one of your 4 Sheikah Slate powers.
Mm-hmm.
Like Elephant Dungeon was the Frost, one of them was the Bombs. You know, they kind of had their one that they sort of centrally focused on, and I thought that was really, really cool and kind of subtle, but like they didn't like put up a big sign that said use the bombs here.
Yeah. And it was a cool throwback to, I mean, I guess traditional Zelda dungeon design too, because it was very much like, hey, in this area you got the boomerang. Guess what you're going to be doing in this dungeon?
Yeah, and the fact that there's the kind of like no required thing for any one place in the world is very cool. Mm-hmm. I think so. We're about at our time here. I'm kind of failing for a final thing to kind of send Zelda off with, unless. What was your favorite moment? And I know we kind of did like favorite story, but like there are things outside of that, like Eventide Island and like some of the weird shrine, like in the world puzzles. So if there's anything that stuck out to you, any kind of one final word that you have about Zelda, now is the time to say it. Reb, do you want to start us off? Pressure's on.
Yes, and I'm sorry I keep bringing up Champion's Ballad. I just finished playing it, and this is like related to the rest of it. Yeah, take your headphones off. I'm gonna actually say this.
Oh, no.
You're good.
The very, very ending of Champion's Ballad, you return to the spot where everything started, and you have one final conversation with one character who's kind of been taking this journey with you this whole time. You've been doing very similar journeys, kind of parallel to one another. And he just kind of gives this like summation of everything that's happened as you look out over the view that you first saw when you came out of the Shrine of Resurrection and looked around and first like got this wide-eyed look at this beautiful world you're about to explore. And it's just this like, even though this world is so huge, everything, like if you do that DLC, everything just comes really nicely full circle. Like I thought the ending of the game like wrapped it up really nicely, but this was just like the perfect coda on top of that, and coming back full circle and standing back where you were to have that little kind of last look at everything before, maybe you'll play it again, but before you kind of like put the controller down and said, I have beaten this game, it's just like I cried. It was beautiful, and it felt like the perfect cap on everything.
That's awesome. Alex is back.
I'm back.
Alex, what about you? What's kind of your final word on Breath of the Wild?
Yeah, I think like just talking about like favorite moment overall is definitely seeing a dragon for the first time, and just kind of the wonder that it instills within you, like as a player. Like I didn't see the one on top of Mount Lanairu until I had already beaten the game. I just didn't go up there really. Like I went up there, but I didn't go up there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's awesome.
And so the first time that I saw it was actually on Dueling Peaks. And I was actually, I had first seen the Rito Divine Beast in the sky. So I was zoomed in on that. And then I see, like, out of the corner of the screen comes, like, this swirling, this sparkling Nosferatu. And he's, like, in the sky. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And just, like, being, like, I think it just, like, it's a great moment that kind of encapsulates my entire experience with Breath of the Wild, which is, like, it instills wonder in me as a player, and that which, like, continually makes me push forward to see what else is out there. Finish the experience. Like, it is one of my favorite games of all time for sure. Yeah, absolutely fantastic game.
Neil, round us out.
It's funny because I can't think of a specific moment within the game, but to me, seeing the launch trailer at the Nintendo Switch presentation, it's still my number one get hype moment of 2017. Yeah. Because even though there was a lot of positive buzz around the game based on people having played early builds, there was a lot of uncertainty about it. Like, was this game going to be ready for launch? And reports were coming out that it was going to get pushed to summer. And for them to finish off that Switch presentation with that trailer, and for them to flash the release date of the Switch was great. And not only that, but for them to just completely nail it. There was some technical hiccups here and there, but that game, when it released, was very much a finished product, and kind of, in my eyes, kind of like silenced the doubters and the naysayers. And it was, like Alex was saying, just a very special game.
Yeah. And like, kind of my final point with it is, like, there are, if you look back at like all the other Zelda games, like, they focus on a kind of like usually an idea, a theme, or a person, or an item. Like, if we think of Ocarina of Time, the actual Ocarina of Time being a thing, and an emphasis on time and time travel and everything. Or if we look at Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, the Wind Waker. This idea of the Waker of the Winds, but Breath of the Wild is different, and it's different in its name as well. Like, when I saw the name, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it seemed kind of corny to focus in on it, but like, it is about living and breathing in this world. And I don't know if any Zelda game has achieved exactly what it wanted to give the player as much as this game has for me, and for not the three of you, and for a lot of other people out there as well. Even people that don't love it as much as we do, I think, have to take a step back and say, like, this is a world that is worth getting lost in. And I think that's really cool. And I think even if you look at all of Nintendo's games, like, Breath of the Wild is on a lot of levels one of the most impressive they've ever created. And I'm very, very happy with it. It's easily one of my favorite games I've ever played, and I'm glad I got to talk about it with the three of you. I'm very hopeful that people out there listening had as much a cathartic release talking about this as I did. It's good to have a conversation generally positive about this game that is very special to me. But thank you all for joining me for this. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you all had fun as well. And I'm going to put some links and whatnot to find more of these wonderful creators out there on the internet. You should definitely follow all of them. And Irrational Passion's Game of the Year content is going to continue through this week and next. For Reb and Neil and Alex Van Aken, I'm Alex O'Neill, and thank you for listening.